A consuming passion. That's what motivates us to spend so much time in the wilderness. Practicing traditional bush skills of 500 years ago was, I think, simply our excuse to justify getting out there for an entire year. But we had set our parameters. No metal, no plastic, no matches, no nylon tent. Nothing between the wilderness and us. The bugs, the cold, and all the elements. Life in nature, on its own terms. Not taking in food would have turned this into a year-long fight for survival. So in keeping with the experience, we committed to using only the traditional foods of the native culture of this land. Foods like wild rice, squash, beaver and moose meat and bear fat, and thankfully for our taste buds, maple sugar. It was impossible to take the year's supply of all the meat we had jerkied and blueberries we had squished and sun-dried in our canoes on the long paddle into our location. So our only expected interruption for the year was to be a food drop by two friends in late September. It's not unusual for anyone to lament the ending of a canoe trip or the cottage season and voice a desire to stay out. But for us, the strength and depth of our desire would lead us away from 33 years of city life and into a life of wilderness living. If we had to, we would come out to civilization for a family or medical emergency. But then, in keeping with the pattern we have always longed for, we would run, not away from civilization, but to the bush.
The preparation stages were very exciting for us, although very labor-intensive. It took about a year and a half of continual learning and practicing. Organizing the traditional food, researching and making our primitive living supplies kept us extremely busy. Fashioning primitive implements, with most of the knowledge coming from books or trial and error, was no easy feat. Months of work gathering clay and tempering it with sand or clamshells to make pottery ended in mostly blown up or broken pots. Utilizing the animal brain by rubbing it into the hide was the traditional method for making containers and clothing. This was our plan until after 2 months of continual scraping of more than 20 moose hides, we discovered them one day in a rotting, putrid mess.
Our first intentions for being out there were to really just get a year alone in the bush together. To have that experience of the two of us in isolation in remote northern Canadian bush. Why we ended up going the primitive route connected to the teaching we've been doing, the courses we ran, and just gave us a kind of almost an excuse for being out there to practice these skills a period longer than just a weekend, to really put them through the test over an entire year. Our primitive gear consisted of what we would need for normal daily living. We had some burned out bowls that we put ashes in and carved them out. They would be our dinnerware and our cutlery. We had pottery that was fired in the ground and used for cooking all of our meals in. We had some bows and arrows, some throwing sticks, and one stone axe, and a digging stick. And that was about it. And then our food supply. We also had with us our traditional food supply. To try to go in and live off the land, as you might often hear people go in and they lived off the land, that's a tough go. Never mind being primitive, it's a tough go with modern tools like guns and knives. To be totally primitive, it's almost impossible, especially without a lifetime of skill level. Our most difficult problem was where to do it. The Great Lakes Boreal Forest crossover region contained the wild edibles and topography we were most familiar with. But it seems wherever you go in that region, you find a hunting or fishing lodge, snowmobile trail or canoe route. When you get right down to it, there's not much unaccessed wilderness left alone out there, and we were looking for solitude. We had some serious concerns on how we would deal with the bugs. I mean, we had no fly repellent or no screening of any sort. We were concerned about that. We'd done survival before where you have a tough time smearing mud all over you to protect you from the mosquitoes. But that's not fun, it's brutal. I don't think we were naive, we just didn't have any real gripping fears about what we were about to do.
I've never felt that there was the risk of an attack. We We did have a bear come through camp in the fall. I never felt threatened by them. They're around, they're around. You keep your camp clean. You don't invite them with smells and things like that. So there's always a possibility, but never really felt threatened. It's a comfort thing. When you're out there, you lose that uneasiness. The firewood was an ongoing thing. The food preparation was constant because of the fire and because of the length of time it took to cook meals. And being that neither Les or I really wanted to be glued to the fire cooking, that was a big challenge for us.
Although very unfamiliar to us, we did finally discover a fairly isolated area just south of the Albany River in northern Ontario, the outstandingly beautiful region of the Wabakimi Wilderness.
Sue and I didn't go out in the bush for a year for a particular cause. We didn't have anything to prove. And although the weather and other elements would test our ability to survive in the bush, our goal was to practice primitive living skills. We had no intention of losing life or limb. We took in emergency medical gear and supplies, a two-way radio, and although strictly traditional, a food supply. There was no camera crew, just a handy cam that we had borrowed and a tripod. So come with us through some wonderful experiences and some tragedy as well, to our home, the outstandingly beautiful Canadian wilderness.
Gracefully done. Wow.
After leaving from the native community of Armstrong, Ontario, we paddled and portaged for about a week and a half and arrived at a small unused lake that would be our personal paradise for the next 12 months.
With the use of only a stone axe and whatever the bush provided, we had to build our summer shelter from the ground on up. We couldn't have guessed just how long it would take to complete some of the more simple tasks without the use of a steel axe or saw. Every single pole put in use had to be burned to size, and just finding ones we could haul back to camp took a great deal of time.
Some people seemed almost obsessed with wondering how we could keep clean for a whole year. But the answer was simple. Every day we washed off, no soap, just water. And without civilization's car exhaust or pollution, it was easy to stay clean.
I think we would have liked to have laid back and just soaked in the beauty of it all. But in keeping with the last year and a half, and as we would find out, the coming year as well, we had to get right down to work. It was mid-May, and the spring rains were coming soon. It was an unusually wet year, and the rain was a constant reminder that we had to stop or slow down to nature's pace.
Without modern conveniences, keeping dry was an ever-present concern as it seemed to rain 8 out of 10 days. Life in the bush is constant preparation. You're always preparing for bad weather.
Well, there you have it. That's pretty much been the picture for about 4 straight days. Strong north and northwest winds. You can see the misting off in behind the island. It's been misting off and on every single day. Makes it very difficult to get anything done. And even worse to try and get out in the canoe.
It was just after we arrived on the lake that we started experiencing reoccurring stomach cramping and nausea. We assumed that it must have been something from our new diet of the traditional moose meat or bear fat, or the wild rice, or maybe even eating out of the slow-cooking pottery. In the back of our minds, we were fearful that it was the water. We wouldn't discover the culprit until after 7 months of dealing with it. There was always so much to do. Containers to make, food and firewood to gather, without a saw. The progress on making primitive implements is painfully slow to anyone used to our modern time schedule. And eating out of earth pottery, gourds, and off slabs of wood is not all that exciting. We had very little idle time. One of the biggest lessons we learned about primitive living is that you really need a full community of people to accomplish all the tasks of a traditional lifestyle. In fact, they would have normally considered 2 people alone in the bush a form of punishment and certain death. In a community, someone is the snowshoe maker, someone the hunter, someone for fire, cooking, clothing, shelter. The list goes on. Without the aid of modern inventions, just surviving out here can be a dangerous ordeal. Days were spent fishing for northern pike with a line made from twisted bark and a bone hook as we settled into nature's rhythms. And although we missed family and friends, we never felt lonely or distressed by the isolation. We were living a dream come true. Without the use of screening or bug repellent, the choice of a windy point for our summer location served us well to escape the hordes of mosquitoes and blackflies. But as this picture of Sue with 60 blackfly bites shows, we would be hit hard whenever searching for materials in the thick bush. Each night we received a 10-minute warning whenever the wind was calm. There was a strange and ominous phenomenon that takes place in the bush. Just when the sun is almost gone, you can hear a far-reaching, moaning buzz. It's the sound of zillions of mosquitoes warming up their body temperatures in preparation of flying around on their nightly search for blood. It takes almost exactly 10 minutes. After that, anyone left out is fair game. On this year-long honeymoon, Sue and I realized that times of peace and beauty were special moments to be treasured.
Hello, operator. I'm calling from a radio phone, and I'd like to make a collect call to area code 416-406.
Through our two-way emergency radio, we received news that my father was given only a few days to live due to cancer. After only 2 months in the bush, we would come out to civilization once again. People have often asked us if we experienced a culture shock on the last day of our year out. But it was when we came out for my father that we had the strangest of psychological shocks.
Hello, Robert. Can you hear me?
Just about, Les. How are you?
Very well. I'm calling on the radio phone, and we could get cut off at any moment.
On the same day, through connecting flights from Thunder Bay, Ontario, we went from the shore of our wilderness home to a taxicab on the 401 in Toronto. Still in bush clothes on the way to see my father, I felt numb. After only 2 days in Toronto, I stood by my father and held his hand as he passed away. I felt a great need to be back in the wilderness to deal with this loss. 7 days later, we left the city. Wilderness solitude is a long way from the chaos of a city, and though movies give the impression you can talk inside the cockpit of a small plane, you cannot. The loudness of a plane keeps you speechless, and your thoughts are for yourself. After dropping you off, it will leave your ears ringing until it lifts above the treetops, and you stand alone in the immensity and power of the quiet wilderness.
We couldn't waste any time. Everything had become moldy and damp after only 10 days away. We had to get right back to work.
Spruce roots would make for a strong cordage to hold things together for our year. Rocks, roots, branches, bark, and moss, all the elements of a good bush shelter. Practicing wilderness survival before our year out always seemed like a bit of a game. Out here it was no game. Either protect yourself or suffer.
Well, after finally getting a day of no rain or just a little bit of misting, we were able to take it to this stage where we've just about completed it. We haven't finished this end yet. We ran out of birch bark, so we've just thrown up some of our deer hide, raw hide, just to protect that end. We'll come back later and put some birch bark on there. The birch bark worked out really well, shingled from the bottom, working our way up, just like a regular shingling system. And we were actually surprised. The gelling from the A-frame into the teepee went really well. It went very smoothly. We didn't have too many holes or gaps to worry about. The hides come over, so I think it's going to work fairly well that way. After we put all the birch bark on, we've layered the moss on top to give us a lot more insulation. We still have to do this area up in here. And the last thing we're doing is basically you just throw on anything you can. Just get down like an animal and just scrape it all up from the ground and throw on all the debris you can. And then these are just old rotted logs that are lying around, and they can help a lot just to deflect even that much more rain. So there's no reason why not just to throw them on if you've got the time. And that's basically all I'm doing here and on the other side. Is using up these old logs for good purpose. And I feel like I'm on home improvements.
While constructing our shelter, we would prune from individual spruce trees the boughs we needed for our bed, and collect only dead birch bark and branches to use as the roofing. In this way, we tried to impact our surroundings as little as possible. Sue and I wanted to live in a primitive fashion not only to test our acquired skills, but because we believed we could achieve a more connectedness with the land. Well, we did achieve that, and there is a profound joy felt as you become more aware of the living and breathing force of the natural world. A great deal of time is taken in the making of something as simple as a spruce bough bed. Being comfortable in the wilderness is an art form.
Fire is a key and vital component to survival. It can take up to a few days just to find all the right materials for a fire bow. We had to keep our fire going 24 hours a day, which without an axe or saw meant gathering wood for at least half the day. Another quarter of the day was spent cooking slowly in pottery, where the smallest draft could crack or explode your pot. To make matters worse, we were suffering from a severe lack of energy due to our as yet unknown stomach problems. So far, our time of living primitive had been nothing but hard work.
Sue and I are more at home in a canoe than anywhere else. Cutting across the glassy surface of a lake or maneuvering down a boulder-strewn set of rapids is life at its best for us. On our life's journey, canoeing has always represented freedom. For this year, it would be freedom from the bugs and tangled, dense bush. Our hearts and spirits soar as we dip our paddles in the water, and we are compelled to feel reverence for the beauty and power of the natural world. There is nothing like experiencing nature from the vantage point of a canoe.
It's nice, eh? Won't be many days like this left. That's for sure.
Are you filming this? Yeah. Somebody has to be the one to make the noise. Otherwise,
Doug Getgood and Fred Rowe were two close friends we had bring in a food and supply drop in late September. It was exciting and wonderful for us to have their visit.
Sue
but they were talking so loud and so fast, or so it seemed to us. The clanging of metal and the modern food felt like more of an intrusion than a welcomed convenience. But we reveled in the conversation and friendship, and they served as a great reminder to us that winter was just around the corner and we had better get working. We hadn't even started building our winter shelter yet.
This is our primitive chef.
Primitive is right.
Fred expressed great concern about our ability to be ready for the winter. He insisted on cutting some 8-foot chunks of wood out in the bush for us to haul in later for firewood. The snow was just around the corner, and the difference between our energy level and theirs seemed extreme. At this stage, we had been living primitively for 8 months, continually bothered by stomach cramps and a lack of energy. The time as well as psychological strength we had lost when we came out to see my father seemed to snowball all through the summer. And now from Doug and Fred, we received the news that the dog I had had for 11 years had died of cancer. Neither time nor confidence was on our side, and winter was on our heels. In a new location, a few kilometers away but on the same lake, we would build our winter cabin, well protected from the frigid north winds. We decided to allow ourselves the use of an axe and a handsaw to build the cabin. In addition, we allowed ourselves the use of a pot we had found in the bush and a small trapper's tin wood stove, since the smoke from the summer shelter had been getting to Sue's asthma. Once again, we had to get right down to work. Doug and Fred had left behind the axe, saw, and stove, as well as a renewed sense of urgency to pick up our pace. It took us only 14 days of extremely hard work to complete the cabin. This gave us an immense feeling of satisfaction. Once the bark and moss were on the roof, we moved in, and the very next day, we got our first snow.
Eventually the snow thawed, and we were back to work. It felt so good to build a cabin using only materials that the bush provided, like spruce roots. Not a single nail. But our stomach problems worsened, and at one point in late November, I was being sick outside, shaking violently and trying not to faint in the wet snow falling all around me. We decided to take a quick flight out to get fixed up. Giardia is a waterborne parasite. It causes sometimes negligible and sometimes severe stomach problems. Because our lake was at the top of its system, with only a small creek running out of it, it acted like a big puddle. So the Giardia had that water to accumulate in and for us to drink from.
For the time being, we would boil all our water, and in the winter, we could melt snow for our fresh drinking water supply. Sphagnum moss, whether chinking your cabin for insulation, utilizing it as an antiseptic sponge for a cut, or even as toilet paper, is one of the most useful materials in the boreal forest. While we were out for a short period to correct the Giardia problem, we received news that would tear at us emotionally. Sue's mom had been diagnosed with a fatal disease. We also returned with the knowledge that Sue was pregnant.
The thing that was hardest emotionally to deal with was the news of my mom having a terminal illness. Being separated from her at that time, there's always the question in your mind of, should you go in? You know, should you be there? And that was tough. I struggled with that.
When winter did hit, it was there to stay, and once again we had to get down to work. As always, we could only go as fast as nature would allow us. Sue and I relied upon each other with great affection, and through circumstances like these, you develop a deep and unbreakable bond.
Snow, winter, spruce boughs for a floor, fur, fire, keep the body warm. Where eagles fly and the caribou lie is where we've got to be. The wolf waits there for me and you and you.
A few weeks later, on a -35 January morning, Sue had to be helicoptered out to Thunder Bay, Ontario. She was suffering from a very painful miscarriage. 2 weeks later, we were back on our way into the bush for one last time.
I've always believed that nature has a way of helping us get in touch with our inner feelings and make peace with ourselves, a place to heal our body and soul. After the miscarriage, the bush seemed to me to be the natural place to recuperate, both physically and mentally.
At -45 degrees outside, you could still wear a t-shirt after the heating of dinner, although water would freeze if left down on the floor. About the only serious problem with the cabin was somewhere between 40 and 50 drips. Neither Sue nor I mind hard physical labor when you're doing something you love, and although it would hit -50 degrees, the cold was never really a problem, as long as you respected it, along with the importance of being able to get a fire going at any time. After the trip out for Sue's miscarriage, we brought our border collie back in with us for some company this time. Other than the ravens and the gray jays, he would be kept on alert by a pair of fearless martins who made a den between the wall of our cabin and the banked up snow on the outside. Although the work was always invigorating, and it felt so good to feel our bodies strengthening, we were, by now, getting tired of it. My father had died. We had had a debilitating struggle with giardia. We had lived very primitively for 8 months, which was all work. My dog had died, and we had learned of Sue's mom's illness. And now we had lost what would have been our first child. When you think about it, none of these things had anything to do with the wilderness, with the exception of the giardia. We had a few months to go out here, so while Sue regained her strength, now was our time to have fun and enjoy the beauty of the Canadian boreal forest. Along with our other dog Tripper, it was time to strap on the snowshoes and check out the world around us. Snowshoeing allows you to slow down in the winter bush and really feel what it's all about. Strenuous work at times, but a very beautiful and natural way to travel. Sue summed it up perfectly one day when she said to me, "When you dream of winter, this is what you dream of."
Winter is a magical time deep in the bush. The contrast between the immense beauty of a snow-blanketed forest and the biting cold and fierce winds of a winter storm captures the imagination and calms the soul. All seasons are good and all seasons are beautiful, but winter has always been the time when I feel most at home, especially when that home is in the wilderness.
We received a surprise visit from local bush pilot Ernie Nichols, along with 2 of his friends. In a display of classic northern hospitality, he brought us in fresh bread, oranges, apples, milk, and 12 homemade muffins still hot from his wife Donna's oven. The surprise saved for last was a bottle of 12-year-old scotch. I think we were a kind of tourist attraction for his overseas visitors. It was strange to be in the middle of the bush and hear talk of the recent Eagles concert or Michael Jackson's marriage. Seeing Ernie seemed to signify the beginning of the end, for with Ernie came a change in the weather, news of a warming trend and possibly rain in a few days. It was a sad feeling, for we weren't ready to leave.
Trip, you didn't have to go in there. Hey? A deep appreciation for simple pleasures came from living in the bush. A warm fire, shelter. It clearly defined what was truly important in our lives.
Bill Mason, the celebrated canoeist, artist, and filmmaker, had this to say as scripting for one of his slideshows. Professor Arthur Lauer expressed himself thus: "Only those who have had the experience can know what a sense of physical and spiritual excitement comes to one who turns his face away from men and towards the unknown. In his small way, he is doing what the great explorers have done before him, and his elation recaptures theirs."
I'm over here. Hey, Sue, look, a herd of caribou. Right behind me here.
Winter slowly began to loosen its icy grip on the bush. We had slept out under the stars beside rushing rapids, listened to the wolves howl, and explored every creek and valley, snowshoeing 20 to 30 kilometers almost every day. Our hearts were saddened at the thought of leaving. In a play of irony, We had to come back to make money, to cover the realities of society that affected us even out here. But also, as the snow began to melt, so then did our fresh supply of drinking water.
I feel the expedition was a success in that we practiced the skills that we had intended on practicing, and we were out there for the duration of the year with the exception of the interruptions that we had.
I would have to say that by far the greatest lesson that I learned from this, and I will continue to hold close to me for the rest of my life, was whatever it is that you're doing, go with your heart. Go exactly with what you feel you would like to be doing, taking into count all of the realities around that. In my past life, in the music career, or in different things that I've done in the past, as a songwriter and those types of things, there was always a way of veering off and going off on a tangent. And this expedition taught me to simply not do that. Find out what's in your heart, keep connected with your heart, which will change all the time, and stick with it above and beyond all other promises and expectations and anything else that comes your way.
The best part of the expedition was being out there. It was the adventure and the excitement of just being there. It's where, for me, it's where I wanted to be.
Would you do it again?
In a second. In a second, I'd do it again.
People ask us if a year like this has finally put all this wilderness traveling stuff out of our systems. How could we have them understand that it's become an even deeper embedded desire within us? This would not be the end of our wilderness life, just the beginning. I think it becomes very difficult to spend any quality time in the wilderness and not feel that there is something, a greater being, a creator at work here. We are all given the freedom to choose, and no one can decide for us how we will respond to what affects our lives. Well, we choose freedom. Out here we have learned to be true to ourselves. We choose snowshoes and solitude, a canoe, and the beautiful Canadian wilderness.
Snow, winter, spruce boughs for a floor, fur, fire, keep the body warm. Where eagles fly and the caribou lie is where we've got to be. Oh, the wolf waits there for me and you. Snowshoes and solitudes, what we dream of. A world of wind and water to explore. Keep a fire burning in our shelter. Walk across the ice to our shore. Aurora Borealis so powerfully entertains, burning like a forest fire, wild and untamed. But you dam the rivers and build the roads and cut the old growth down until there's nothing left but ground and us. And us. Snowshoes and solitudes, what we dream of. A world of wind and water to explore. our shelter. Walk across the ice to our shore. Snowshoes in solitude. Snowshoes in solitude. Snow, winter, spruce boughs for a floor, fur, fire, keep the soul warm. Snowshoes and solitudes, what we dream of. A world of wind and water to explore. Keep a fire burning in our shelter. Walk across the ice to our shore. Snowshoes and solitudes, what we dream of. A world of snow and ice to explore. Keep a fire burning in our shelter. We paddle across the lake to our shore. Snowshoes and solitude. Snowshoes and solitude. The wind is light, the sky is blue. My heart is heavy when I don't have you, and I miss you. Like a parched lamb misses rain. I camp on the land, a boat on the sea. Life ain't life if you can't be free to live it. You'll always find a way. 40 hours of work week were never meant for me. Lately I've been bitten by the bug that sets us free. Wilderness wandering and ocean waves are calling. Standing in a forest you can hear when trees are falling. Oh, 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 this is free. Oh, 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 free to be. A little to the left, a little to the right, a lot in the middle, 'cause it feels so right just loving you. Neath the sun and neath the moon. Years they come, years they go. All I know is they all go by too soon. Don't waste your days away. 40 hours of work week were never meant for me. Lately I've been bitten by the bug that sets us free. Wilderness wandering and ocean waves are calling. Standing in a forest, you can hear when trees are falling. Oh, 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 this is free. Oh, 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 free to be. Oh.